Hi, everybody. I'm not supposed to touch that. Okay. So you've had some really funny stories, and I feel like it's time everybody just settled in for some sad times. Yeah. Yeah. Are we ready to get sad together? So how many people here have ridden a bus before? How many people here have cheated on their girlfriend before? Come on. Thank you. The one person who's I cheated on my girlfriend when I was 25. She was lovely. I did not make a wise decision. I did it because I had fallen in love with another girl. That was my defense. That's a terrible defense to use to the woman you love. I'm also in love with someone else. I know, isn't that weird? So they both broke up with me. Well, one went to tree plant, and the other broke up with me. And I was left alone in Montreal, and it was terrible, to say the least. As a person who's been dumped twice during the summer, when in Montreal, which is the best time of year in Montreal, you become like the worst barbecue guest ever. People are just like, here comes Miriam with a magnum of champagne and the worst story ever. We've all heard it before. Oh my God. So yeah, my friends, at one point we were playing The Sims. This was back in the day. It was like 2002. And Sims, like with the people, had just come out. So to try to train me out of thinking about my ex-girlfriend, my friend built a little room for her. First made a character of her, who I felt immediately very close to, and then made a little room for her and put my ex-girlfriend in the room and then took the door away. This was a thing you could do, so the room had no exit. And then made me sit and watch with him while she expired and uttering tiny two-dimensional profanities. And then she died in her own urine. And I was like, was that supposed to make me feel better? And he was like, it didn't. So I felt, you know, I know I said I said sad, but I come from a background of comedy. So the point is I wasn't getting a lot of sympathy after a few weeks. And so I decided that the best thing to do, and I was also, I'm not going to lie, feeling a lot of self-hatred. I did, in fact, love my ex-girlfriend very much. And she had rescued me from about 5 years of self-inflicted homophobia. And as a thank you to that, I decided to have an affair. So it was a really tough time. And so I took my $143, which was all I had in the world, and I bought a bus ticket to Whitehorse, which is where my best friend, who had just had a baby, lived. And she said, yeah, I'd be happy to see you. I mean, I have one tiny helpless being, so why not just take another one on? And so I got on the bus in Montreal and then planned to not speak or talk to anyone until I reached Whitehorse. And this was like 2003. So do people kind of remember 2003 at all? We didn't have any of the things that people kind of take for granted now. There were no cell phones. There were cell phones, not for students. They were definitely not smart cell phones. There was no 3G. Like, that didn't exist anymore yet. So like there was no checking your email from the road. There was no calling people from the road unless you had a bag full of quarters heavy enough to like really hurt your arm while you carried it onto the bus. You were not communicating with anyone. And I really wanted that. Like, I had really screwed up. I could tell. Like, I had made a lot of very significant mistakes, and I felt I needed about 4 days to process just how bad the mistakes really were. And so I got on the bus, and I didn't speak to anyone that I knew for 4.5 days. And I had a sleeve full of Ani DeFranco CDs, as was my right and privilege. And the space that I occupied was about this wide and about that high. And I had a luggage rack, and I had a tiny bathroom that I shared with the like 100 or so other occupants of the bus. And I didn't lie down in a horizontal position for 112 hours, which I thought was totally fair, given that all my mistakes had resulted from lying down in horizontal positions for about a month and a half. And so yeah, I thought that being on the road would be this philosophical thing. Like, I wasn't driving, I wasn't doing anything. I was just listening to terrible folk music and writing in my journal. And all it really did was it gave me this terrible kind of moving cabin fever. Like, I felt productive while being completely unproductive. And the only thing I was producing was really strong emotions. So, for example, I knew that Mel, this was my lover, who I also missed terribly, had gone tree planting in Manitoba. When I got to Manitoba, which is a long province, might I add, many, many hours were spent in Manitoba, she had told me about how tree planting went. I mean, this is what lovers do. They lie next to each other, they describe their lives. And she had said when she tree planted, the clear-cut areas where they would plant their seedlings would have these things called burns in them. And burns are piles of leftover foliage from the tree planting, the big trees that get cut down. And she would say, you know, in the hottest part of the day, we like shelter by the burns, and that's where we eat our lunch. And so as the bus was driving through the province of Manitoba, every time I saw a burn approach, this irrational part of me would be like, I'm going to see Mel on the other side of that burn. Like, this is going to stop being so painful because I'm going to get there, and then we're going to pass it, and I'm going to look out the window, and she's going to be sitting there, and I'm going to see her in her beautiful white tank top with her beautiful blonde hair, and it's going to just all seem like all of this was worth it. And every time I would get there, my heart would leap into my throat. I would crane my neck like something important was passing, and we'd get to the empty side of the burn. And not even another group of tree planters. Like, then I began to question everything. I was like, maybe the stories she told me weren't even true. Like, maybe nothing that happened to me had any meaning whatsoever. And then I would reach for my trusty Ani DeFranco CD and just subside into misery. So then, you know, there was a 15-hour stopover in Edmonton. And if you think traveling and being miserable is bad, a 15-hour stopover in Edmonton while you're miserable is actually a lot worse. So I got to Edmonton. I showered at the Y. That cost me $4. I had a souvlaki, my first sit-down meal. Like, I'd eaten nothing but soup and potato chips. That took up half an hour. I couldn't afford to pay for a place to sleep, so I just had to and it was like about 7 in the morning when we arrived, and I was going to pull out of there at like 11 at night the next day, or at the end of that day. So I didn't really have anything to do, so I went to sit in this park and journal some more, because that's what I was doing then. We were all journaling. There was no blogs, guys. There was not even that, okay? I had nothing. So I'm journaling in the park in Edmonton, and I start seeing these kind of like scruffy-looking kids, and they're all gathered around something on the floor. And again, the internet didn't exist, so this was a meme. Like, I was about to find something cool. So I wandered over to the kids, and I was like, you know, hesitantly, because I hadn't really spoken to a person in 2.5 days or something. So I was like, what are you doing? And there's this really sad-looking raven on the ground, and it's flapping a little bit. One of its wings is pinned. And the kids are stoned out of their minds, and they're holding a joint, and they're like, this bird is really hurt, ma'am. And actually, they didn't call me ma'am because I was only 25. They probably addressed me as an equal. I forgot how that felt. Anyway, they said, girl, who's not old yet, this bird is really hurt. And so we're going to try to get it stoned so that its passage to heaven is less painful. And I was looking at them, and I was like, that's about as intelligent as trying to take the bus across the country to forget that you're a jerk-off. Therefore, I know it will not work. And so we watched them try to, because then another guy who was about my age and looked less crazy came up, and we just stood and watched them try to get this bird stoned. And at that point, I also realized that the fundamental problem that I had at the root of my personality was cowardice, because I couldn't actually step in and say, don't try to get that bird stoned, guys. Just break its neck. Like, you're not fixing anything by prolonging its misery. You're not making things better by pushing it into a situation where it has to stay alive longer. Me and this guy, who turned out to be also on the lam from a relationship, just stood there and watched the teenagers torture the bird until I think the bird hopped away and just died, and the teenagers walked away. And I was just standing there, and I was like, this is a metaphor for this whole thing. There is no lesson in this. Why did I do this? I'm so tired, and I smell awful. And then I got back on the bus. And usually stories that are sad end with something, right? They end with some sort of thing that you get out of the experience that makes it all worthwhile. And so I struggled with this story because I couldn't figure out how to end it for everyone here, because I wanted it to be something they would take away with them. But I also didn't want to lie about it and say that, on the trip I learned this important thing about myself. Like, it was uncomfortable. I learned that you get really swollen ankles if you spend more than 24 hours sitting still. I learned that when you go into the foothills of the Rockies, which is some of the most beautiful parts of Canada, the highway suddenly turns into this crazy afterthought. It doesn't get put down straight anymore, and there's nothing on it anymore, and you don't understand Canada as a country anymore because you realize its major highway systems go to nowhere for no purpose. You also realize that the term milk run in these places literally means milk is being run from one place to another. as you watch the bus driver, who up to this point has been doing nothing but transport people, take gigantic cartons of milk onto the bus and stop every like 40 miles or so to drop them off at these tiny shacks that look like blueberry stands where people live. And the thing was that I was so used to being surrounded by people because I was a city person. I was like, this kind of solitude, this kind of like sitting alone by myself could become a way that I lived if I don't find a way to kind of like get over myself. Like if I choose to live in this dramatic way, I will just do this forever. So my options now for you guys are to say, I'm going to give you like a choose your own adventure kind of ending. So you can decide how to get me off this bus. Do you want to hear what happened when I got to Whitehorse, or do you want to find out what happened to my 2 exes? Can we do like a show of hands maybe? So, but okay, cheer if you want Whitehorse. Okay, cheer if you want exes. Wow, okay, sorry guys, no one really cares what happened to me in Whitehorse. It's really of no consequence, nothing happened. My 2 exes, so the first ex, the one that had been the woman who rescued me from my homophobia, is actually a lovely person, and she has since forgiven me. On another road trip I took to London where she happened to have moved in with my good friend, we took a walk and we talked it out. And in true lesbian fashion, we came to an understanding, and now we are friends. Oddly, 3 months after we broke up, she met a man at a rave who is now her husband, and they have a beautiful 2-year-old who I just met this summer, and it's a lovely lady, lovely little girl. That's one ex. The other, the lover who I had left and thought was never going to see her again because I felt so bad, she ended up jumping on her own bus and following me to Whitehorse, which is probably the most ego-soothing thing that could ever happen to a person. So anytime I feel low, I'm like, someone followed you to Whitehorse on a bus. Do not hate yourself. But she came, we had a sort of tearful reconciliation. We dated for like another 1.5 years. And then she dumped me for another person because it turns out wrecking relationships is what she does. So lesson learned, lesson learned. So thank you so much. You've been a great audience.